Good evening, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to News in Focus. Of course, a reduced News in Focus due to Hajj programming that, of course, started on Wednesday evening. So, of course, we got half an hour with you, and we'll try and get the best out of this half an hour. My name is Faraz Patel. We'd like to thank you for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, TSTV channel 347. Of course, we have come to the end of Africa Month, where honoring the leaders, the icons, and many of those who have played a massive role when it comes to Africa. Of course, the continent still seeks to have a much more united front, but with the G20 that is currently set to be hosted in South Africa, it allows for that to change the potential narrative. Joining me now to have this discussion when it comes to Africa Month, I'd like to welcome Mr. Kofi Kwaku, who is a Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Kofi, thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Kofi, where are we as a continent right now in terms of moving past the post-colonial era?
Well, frankly, if we look at to do a clear assessment of this, an audit will show that we haven't moved very far from it. There's something that you already know, and I think your audience also knows. It's what's now called neo-colonial approach to looking at the Africa of today and perhaps Africa of the future. If the leadership hasn't been able to dismantle, if you want, the building blocks of the old colonial system that's still hanging about, that's been re-engineered. And let's take a simple example. And that one is the formation of the what is today the African Union, which was before and the Organization of Africa Unity, and which was created on 29th of May 1963. And it went until today and changed in 2000 in South Africa, by the way. And as much as the African Union has changed, it's got a new, if you want, buildings, it's got a new face and so forth. If you think about it, we haven't been able to build our own headquarters. The headquarters of the African Union were built and given to us by the Chinese. And then, of course, the Chinese have also given us, again, another building, which is called the Center for Disease Control. This is just a simple example, which, in fact, what I'm trying to do is to say is we haven't been able to be accountable and responsible to be the fiduciary, responsible people of our own union. That's a simple organization across 54 African countries, let's say 55 with, Western Sahara. So that is a simple element that tells you that we still have a lot of work to do. But even if you compare with the European Union, I think has got now either 27 or 30, I can't remember the exact number, but much smaller than the African Union. So it gives you a sense of the proportion of the tasks at hand to be able to build such a union and make sure it functions properly. I don't even want to talk to you about all the biggest challenges, extreme poverty, unemployment, not just older people, but the youth, as well as inequality. South Africa, for example, ranks as #1 country in terms of inequality on the Gini coefficient. I will stop there, but I'm sure we can.
No, definitely. I want to touch on the African Union, Kofi, because a lot of, when you listen to many people, when you see what happens, of course, when they do meet, it becomes more of a talk workshop. That's it. And there's no real action that is happening. I'm obviously going to reference the current civil war that is happening in Sudan right now. You see what is happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We, of course, just saw a couple of months back when the South African National Defence Force was, of course, involved in skirmishes with the M23 rebels who had been backed by Rwanda. And, of course, dialogue is important, but what people are asking for is, especially in conflict regions, that AU peacekeepers play that active role. Is the African Union taking that steps? Do we see that happening, and how so?
I'm going to be blunt with you. On paper, yes, but in practice, no. That's the short answer I can give you. And in fact, coming back again to the sort of commitment, financial and fiduciary commitment, Almost 2/3 of the finances of the African Union is provided by the European Union, and then the United States and other countries. I mean, how responsible, if not irresponsible, can African leaders be in their own continent, and they're still looking for other people to come and help and solve their problems? I mean, of course, we can complain about foreign meddling, countries like the United States or France and West Africa, and then of course the British in different parts, But this responsibility must be borne by African themselves. They keep saying African African solution for African problems, but this is just talks and a show. It's a bit sad for me to say this because we are so overwhelmed by what's not working, and we can see the evidence so much so that we cannot even see how we managed to have such a resilient continent. And by 2030, it's going to be probably have 1/3 of the world population. It's already such a big continent and in such a big population. But just the quality of the leadership that's running it is a dismal failure.
Coffee Africa Free Trade Agreement, on paper, it seems beautiful. It allows for it to happen. But is it still viable right now? I mean, I hear President Cyril Ramaphosa saying that this is the way it should be. It should go ahead and it should be the basis on which Africa bases its trade. But do you see it still as a viability given that many of the taxation systems are still copied from the West?
Yes, indeed. It's still a viable, I mean, the idea is beautiful and we all know it. With that movement, there is no business. There is no economy. We've seen it during apartheid in South Africa when we had the pass laws. Black people and other people, brown people, couldn't move about, couldn't go where to do business. So movement, especially free movement of people, ideas, capital, and then of course, persons to move from one place to another are essential to be able to get the, Africa, continental free trade area to function fully. The idea is noble. It's a great thing to have. But until Africans themselves, especially the leaders of these countries, can open up their borders, many of them are still stuck on what's called the outcomes of the Berlin Conference, where in 1884 to 1885, the Europeans really split up, they scrambled Africa, as they called it, into small portions and parts so much so that the carve it out and the sucking up the wealth and the natural resources, those borders are still there. And the borders, they're not just physical only. They've become mental borders that most people now see themselves as South Africans, Zimbabweans, and Malawians, and so forth. And it's created all these barriers or walls so much that people don't want to see other Africans. I mean, we've seen what's happening in South Africa with xenophobia, and this doesn't happen only in South Africa. In Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, in the DRC, in all these places, in Rwanda. So these borders have become mental ones, and to dismantle them will be important. Few countries are trying to do that. Rwanda is trying to do that. I think Tanzania, Kenya as well. So much so that we let these borders flow in a way that people can move about. In West Africa, it's worked with the economic community of West African states, where people can move from one country to another one without needing to check on you need a visa to get in. But in Southern Africa, although it works, but it's still very tough for the rest of the continent to move about. So if somebody from Côte d'Ivoire wants to visit South Africa, they need a visa.
Yeah.
They want to visit Botswana, they ask you for your bank account. They ask you for all kinds of things. So it makes it difficult to even do business. But the elite are moving about. But we don't want the elite only to move about. We want a majority of people to be able to benefit from the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. On paper, it's working. The headquarters is sitting in Accra, Ghana, not far away from Côte d'Ivoire. And then, in fact, the Secretary General, His Excellency Wamkele Mene, is from South Africa.
Kofi, the question when it comes to xenophobia, we've just got about a few minutes. It's always been a topic that especially here in South Africa, when you've seen various attacks that have happened when it's come to foreign nationals, and it's always raised the question when it comes to borderless Africa. In a time where the far right is increasing, especially in Europe, is Africa prepared to allow for borderless countries so that not just free trade can happen, but also at the same time, there can be that sense of unity amongst Africans, of course within reason, given that if a borderless Africa was to happen, you may allow for criminal elements to occur. So where are we in trying to balance this act right now?
No, you've got it. This is an excellent question. This balance is very, very serious and must be done very carefully. As much as we want a borderless Africa, we really want to make sure that people are moving about are not dangerous people, and so that they don't create all kind of terrorist havoc wherever they're going. However, governments need to pay attention to this whole, movement around Africa. They have to find a way. And I think on paper, the idea is brilliant, but in practice, it's not happening. It won't happen now for the next decades. It'll take a bit more time to take place. That I'm sure if Africa wants to move forward, there must be some kind of borderless Africa, which means basically people can move about to do business. You can have a 90-day visa where you can go one place or maybe a year. That should be possible. The European Union is doing much of that, and it seems to be working well. But again, as I say, contextually, Europe is much smaller than Africa, and then to be able to police these kind of frontiers might be difficult. However, the idea is brilliant.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Kofi Kwaku as May, of course, marked Africa Month. Do stay tuned. Welcome back. I'm sitting in conversation with Senior Research Fellow at the Center for China and Africa Studies at the University of Johannesburg, Kofi Kwaku. Kofi, again, thank you so much for staying with us. Kofi, it's quite clear Africa is the battleground for the two parts of the world, that the Far East, most notably China, and of course the West, whether it's Europe or the United States. I think it's quite easily and fairly to say that most of Africa, and of course you've mentioned it, when I asked you that first question with regards to the African Union, that Africa is moving much more closer towards the Far East, to China, in terms of investment and infrastructure.
Yes, indeed. I mean, the choices are very simple. You have, for example, the neo-colonial legacy burden that's in the heart and mind of people after centuries of legacy colonial outset. We find that Africans are looking for alternatives, and it seems the old colonial groups are not giving the kind of options Africa is looking for: development, peace, security, and then being able to find ways to live in a world where they are counted as potential, not only potential nations that can provide also value in a concert of nations, but also a nation that we can trust. And if there are alternatives for Africans to look into, as we're seeing more and more from China, from Russia, from Iran, from Qatar and other countries, Africans have to look at them and see what works for them, and as with Chinese call, a win-win solution. And some of the win-win solutions are coming more and more from China. China is building infrastructures in Africa, is building hospitals, schools, giving a chance to people to see a well-being life, not to be seen as beggars or having look as cattle, as the World Bank usually does. Almost all the reports are coming out of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and other big Western institutions are consistently shutting out negative things about Africa. And you wonder how, under this burden, Africans are still alive. So there must be something wrong. There's a gap somewhere. And so Africans are saying, we're going to try alternatives. And China is providing some serious alternatives. What, about 82 billions or 92, I think 82 billions that we know of in the past 5 years or so. And then China is also organizing, platforms to get Africans to talk to it. Of course, the old colonial powers in Europe and the United States and others are seeing this. They're branding it as a new colonial power entering in agreement with Africa. And Africans are saying, so what? We need to choose the partners we want. and the people we need to work with. So the opportunity for alternatives must be seriously considered by Africans. And those considerations need to focus on a few points. Can these partnerships help us to deal with extreme inequalities, unemployment, creating jobs for our people, and then get rid of all these inequalities by and large to a certain degree, and then corruptions and of course crime.
Kofi, owning of the minerals. I mean, whenever you hear that from whichever scholar or former leader, it's always one where Africa needs to own its own minerals. Now, of course, in a multipolar world where investment is necessary, it makes that hard for it to happen. But as we are in the 21st century, 25 years into it, is there ever going to be a time where Africa, the countries itself, takes full control of its minerals, sort of like a nationalization perspective, and say, well, we are going to hold it, and if you want foreign investment, you play to the tune of us? Some may look at Burkina Faso under its leader, Ibrahim Traoré, and one may say that is an example of it happening. Africa controlling its own minerals. How far are we, or how close are we to that happening?
We're not close yet, in the sense that much of the wealth, the mineral wealth, rare earth minerals, rare earth elements, minerals, and so forth, are still under the control of Western powers in large part, but also Asian powers as well. And I must say, it is going to be possible. I would say the next generation, about 20, 25 years, it will be possible. But what it needs is, it needs a conscious walk in our population to know what they have and what they own. And I can tell you, Mr. Patel, Africans have very little clue about what their own assets are. I can give you a simple example before I come back to the issue of Burkina Faso with President Ibrahim Traoré. South Africa, if I were to ask South Africans, they have no clue how much minerals they have, how much money. The official numbers that are given are literally not really aligning with the realities on the ground. South Africans probably don't even know that they also own ocean assets to about 2.3 million square kilometers, in addition to their land asset that's about 1,202,000 square kilometers. And if you combine that, South Africa is not only 1 million, South Africa is close to 3.5 million square kilometers. That includes both the land asset and the ocean asset. But guess what? South Africa doesn't have the means to patrol its ocean assets. So people are fishing in it from Asia and from the US, from Europe, almost for free. And the ocean's got more resources there than, in fact, the landmass. And these are the kind of things that we need to do an audit of these assets. And for your information, the World Bank, not a couple of years, probably 5 to 6 years ago, very quickly, done some kind of putting together a project to do just that, at a $1 billion asset, to sort of audit and then sort of find ways to put together a system that will be able to collect all the assets of Africa. And sadly enough, this project just disappeared. We don't know where it is so far. But anyway, to close up on Ibrahim Traoré, this is perhaps a way for Africans to declare that we need to take over our resources. Of course, many people will say, this is a dictatorship, this is a military junta, but for goodness sake, the democratic rulers of Africa haven't managed to do it. Only dictators are managing to do that. We can encourage them, it's a good start, but also we need to be vigilant so that the government of Burkina Faso doesn't turn around and change and become like the other military dictators who don't care about their people. But I think it is possible. What's happening in Burkina Faso is an extraordinary moment in time to see how a young leader, but an African leader, could play such a role. And he has become now the symbol, not just as for the young people, but also for all other people in the world, in Africa and the world, a symbol of freedom, a symbol of possibilities.
Kofi, one final question. South Africa is hosting the G20. I'm assuming that I'll be seeing you there at the event. Of course, that'll happen in Nasrec. This is massive, isn't it? For Africa to host such a massive event, whether or not US President Donald Trump comes, of course, the show must go on. We've seen South Africa take that step as being what many are calling an honest mediator. President Cyril Ramaphosa conducted himself in the most mature and dignified way last week at the White House. This is a massive moment, isn't it? Not just for Pretoria, but also for the continent as a whole.
I fully agree with you. There's nothing else more than I can say. This is a very important gathering, and having South Africa lead it to a certain way is both a privilege and an opportunity to get South Africa's not only image, but a continental image, but also international image out there. And President Ramaphosa did quite well when he was talking to President Trump. I mean, his closure of their meeting was just about that. He said, I want to hand over the next G20 summit so that you can have it. And we know the next G20 summit will be held in the United States. If President Trump doesn't come, of course, it's going to have a sort of blemish on the summit, but we shouldn't be deterred about it. We should go on and do our summit and have an African flavor to it, and then stamp on it and make sure that it comes out with some really good things, not just talk shop, that there's what's called legacy programs after that, that things that come out that have been decided can be seen visible, could be roads, infrastructure, water issues, but a focus on development is also important, education, but also the youth. And we're hoping that the conversation will not only stop at the summit itself, but will be visible in the lives of South Africans, but also the rest of Africa as well. And it is hoped that it goes very well. It is a big, big, big project.
Mr. Kofi Kwaku, thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus here on Hilaal TV. Much appreciated.
You're welcome, Mr. Patel, and looking forward to seeing you again.
Yeah, definitely, without a doubt. That's Kofi Kwaku, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. That's all we have for you in News in Focus. Don't forget, 8 o'clock, Labaik Allahumma, which is, of course, our daily Hajj show up until the end of the first 10 days. From myself, Faraz Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.